We like to think the future is mostly predictable, that it'll follow the same rules as our past. Sure, things don't always go as planned, but there are limits. It's not like you'll open the front door next Tuesday and see a pig flying by. But what if you did? We all have to deal with some amount of uncertainty, whether we like it or not. But wouldn't it be nice if there was a way to take advantage of, say, the next Bitcoin? Or to avoid losing everything you owned in a hurricane? In his book, The Black Swan, Nicholas Taleb explains that the way that we predict the future is all wrong. If we want to stop being blindsided, we can't keep basing our expectations on the past. This book, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for 36 weeks, is the second installment in Taleb's 5-part series, Incerto. In it, he describes his experience as a child caught up in an unexpected war, and how the lessons he learned about predicting the unpredictable led to his breakout success in the stock market. In this video, we'll explain the key takeaways from Taleb's book. First, we'll explore what a black swan is. Then, we'll discuss what is and isn't predictable, and how to distinguish between the two. And finally, we'll take a look at what Taleb says are the best ways to prepare for the unpredictable. A black swan is a major event that we didn't predict that changes what we think is possible. It doesn't exist in our worldview until we see it, so it is always a surprise. For example, if all the swans you've ever seen were white, it's natural to assume that all swans are white. Then, if you see a black swan, it's a huge shock, because you stop believing it was possible for a swan to be any other color. While we can't predict when we'll see a black swan, we can still anticipate what kind of black swan is most likely to appear and where it might crop up. Some business sectors, for example, are more likely to experience a positive upset than a negative one, and vice versa. For example, positive black swans are particularly common in the movie and tech industries because there's a lot of opportunity for unexpected successes. Nobody could have predicted that a foreign drama like Netflix's Squid Game series would have been such a big hit in the States. And when computers were the size of buildings, it would have been crazy to think that one day we'd be carrying them around in our pockets. When you're looking to identify a positive black swan area, compare the worst and the best possible outcomes. If the best outcome would have a greater impact, while the worst outcome wouldn't have much of an effect at all, it's a positive black swan area. Let's hop back to the movie industry, where the negative impact of a bad movie is much less dramatic than the positive impact of a great one. For example, consider the negative impact of Marvel's lowest grossing movie, 2013's The Wolverine. It cost $120 million to make, and it grossed $400 million worldwide. So even though it was a failure, they didn't really lose anything. It still earned enough to make 3 more movies. In contrast, their most successful movie, The Avengers, was a total black swan event that brought in $1.5 billion. The difference in impact is huge. On the other hand, some areas of our society are more likely to experience a negative black swan, because an ideal outcome is only kinda good, but a bad outcome is terrible. A simple example is skydiving. The best possible outcome is that you really enjoy it. You get to see the world in a way you never had before, and maybe you don't even throw up. But the worst possible outcome? Well, let's just say it's a lot more life-changing. In short, the difference between a positive and a negative black swan area is all about how dramatic the outcome can get. It's a matter of balance. But remember, you can guess where you might see a black swan, but whether or not one actually happens is unpredictable. But how do we respond to black swans? According to Taleb, when we experience an unexpected event, we usually try to prove that we could have seen it coming, even though that's clearly not the case. The reason we do this, he says, is because humans don't like randomness. We like things to follow rules that make sense. And we want to be able to find the cause behind every event, because the uncertainty of not knowing why makes us feel uncomfortable. There are so many articles out there explaining, for example, the sudden rise of Bitcoin, or what caused the 2008 market crash. Even when we're horrified by tragic surprises, understanding why they happened helps us feel better. But that kind of thinking, Taleb says, leaves us open to surprises. Every time we find the rules, we prove to ourselves that the world is predictable. But it's not. We can't predict everything. A black swan is always a surprise. According to Taleb, experts are more likely to be surprised by a black swan event than anyone else, especially when they're confident in their knowledge. He explains that the more you know in any particular field, the more you narrow your views. You start to think that you know it all, and end up blindsided by surprise discoveries. Here's a great example. In 17th century Europe, people took for granted that the Earth was the center of the universe. It was an accepted fact. Scientists didn't even bother examining it. So when Galileo discovered that it couldn't be true, that actually the Earth revolves around the sun, people were so shocked they labeled him a heretic. If you think of yourself as an expert, be careful. Make sure you stay open to surprises. Here's an example. I've been studying filmmaking for close to 6 years now. I have all my own equipment, and I spent a lot of time making sure I know exactly how it all works. So when I showed up on set for my first professional shoot, I was extremely confident that it'd be smooth sailing. But I quickly learned that you should never get too comfortable. In the middle of my shoot, I turned on my camera and nothing happened. I had no idea why. I had been using it all day, so I knew it wasn't broken, and I knew that the battery was charged. So I freaked out. I had been so confident that I hadn't thought of a backup plan. I unplugged it all and I put it back together, and luckily, somehow, thanks be to the film gods, it started working again. Nowadays, I come with a second camera and the expectation that something will go wrong. Now, I'm not saying that I could have predicted that my camera was gonna fail that day. The mistake I made was assuming that it wouldn't. I didn't stay open to surprises. I got overconfident and I almost blew my first pro shoot because of it. The question is, if we can't predict a black swan, what can we predict? Simply put, there are two kinds of events, predictable and unpredictable, which live in two worlds. Taleb calls them mediocristan and extremistan. To avoid being blindsided, make sure you know which world you're looking at. Predictable things live in mediocristan and can be charted on a bell curve. We can safely predict events that happen in mediocristan because there's very little randomness there. Human height is a good example. We know that there won't be any kind of crazy outliers. We'll never find a human who's 100 feet tall, so we can write that possibility off. Hard sciences like physics tend to live in mediocristan too. A falling object follows clear rules, and if you know the math, you'll never be surprised. Unpredictable things live in extremistan and can't be neatly charted because the outcomes are too random. This is the world where black swans live, and the impossible is always more likely than we expect. We can't predict our rate of scientific discovery. For example, the cure for cancer might be found tomorrow, or it could take years. And while we've been expecting a big earthquake in California for 20-something years now, no one can predict when it'll happen, just that it probably will. The takeaway is that when we assume everything lives in mediocristan, we're blindsided by every outlier. Here's an example of a little thing that really put into perspective for me just how many aspects of our lives secretly live in extremistan. If someone was to ask me one thing I could always find at a grocery store, I'd have said an onion. I've literally never been in a situation where I couldn't find one. So when I had to make a last-minute run to the grocery store this weekend and I couldn't find any, I was shocked. I went to multiple grocery stores, not an onion in sight. It turned out because of a random salmonella outbreak in Mexico, onions all over the West Coast were recalled. It was like I'd crossed over into some kind of extremistan twilight zone, at the mercy of events hundreds of miles away. I didn't see it before, but all groceries live in extremistan, don't they? Whether they're available or not depends on a complicated supply chain in which all kinds of things could go wrong. Maybe you remember a certain black swan event that led to a sudden drop in the availability of toilet paper. But what makes it so hard to predict a black swan? Why is Taleb so certain that predicting them is impossible? Here's what he says. First, many of our biggest discoveries are totally random. Every day there's a chance that someone with the right knowledge will be in the right place to make a big discovery. But there's an even larger chance that it'll be missed. Here's an example. In 1920, the scientist Alexander Fleming left an uncovered petri dish next to an open window. When he examined the dish later, he noticed that it had been contaminated by mold. and that any bacteria near this mold had died off. That mold was penicillin, and its byproduct became the world's first antibiotic. By pure luck, Fleming was the right person at the right time. If someone had decided to clean his lab up and throw the dish out, he wouldn't have discovered penicillin. It was a random accident, and that's what makes discoveries impossible to predict. The next reason is that the more complex a system is, the harder it is to create an accurate model of what's going on. When it comes to predicting the weather, for example, there are so many variables to account for that even the best models aren't right every time. At best, we end up with a useless prediction, like there's a 23% chance of rain. How much would you bet on that? Finally, we often base our predictions for the future on past events. We assume that if we know what happened last time, we can guess what'll happen next time. The problem is, hindsight isn't 20/20 at all. Let's say you find a puddle of water on your desk, and you want to figure out how it got there. All you can really do is guess. Maybe there was a leak somewhere, or your coworker spilled their drink. Maybe it melted from an ice cube. Sure, some possibilities are more likely than others, but there are so many possibilities that it's impossible to identify for sure what the real cause was. If we can't predict Black Swan events, what can we do about them? The answer, Taleb says, is that we can prepare. Ideally, we want to take advantage of positive Black Swans and avoid being hurt by negative ones. We do this by being sociable, proactive, and diversified. First, let's talk about being sociable. The more you pursue connections and friendships, the more support you'll have. When a surprising opportunity or problem comes up, you'll want the right people in your corner. A savvy friend who understands, say, how to start a small business or how to pump floodwater out of your basement will dramatically improve your outcomes. Make it a habit to connect with new people, especially outside of your usual social circle. Next, be proactive. Make sure you never miss an opportunity to learn a useful skill or to be in the right place at the right time. Let's say your neighbor asks you to help build a fence. You're not obligated to, but you do it anyway. You work hard, you learn a lot, and you enjoy a few free beers. Not a bad deal. Years later, you're happily living elsewhere when a tree collapses in your backyard and takes out your fence. It's a total Black Swan, but you're prepared for it. Your past experience has given you all the skills you need to rebuild your own fence. So there's no panic, no stress, and no expensive contractors. You just get it done. When you often say yes to invitations and experiences, you broaden your worldview. You see more of what's possible. You expand your skill set, and you become more able to handle whatever comes your way. On the other hand, if you just say no all the time, you'll miss every lucky break you ever get. Finally, be diversified. Before you take a risk, consider where you're most likely to see a positive or a negative Black Swan and adjust accordingly. Be smart about what you risk and where. For example, Taleb's field is in the stock market. He puts the majority of his money in safe investments, areas where a negative Black Swan was very unlikely. Then, to maximize his chances of benefiting from a positive Black Swan, he put the rest of his money in companies he thought had a chance of making it big. As a result, he was able to take advantage of good surprises and avoid being hurt by bad ones. Now, that makes it sound like preparation needs to be goal-oriented or focused somehow. But really, it's just about making the most of what's available to you and growing more resilient because of it. For example, after college, I moved home until I could figure out what my next step should be. Part of the agreement I made with my parents is that I'd help get their yard in shape. During this time, I was proactive. I took the opportunity to learn how to dig out pathways and build gardens. As I worked, I was sociable. I chatted with my neighbors about what I was doing and what my plans for the future were. And I made quite a few connections. When the pandemic hit and acting jobs were rare or non-existent, my work paid off. Thanks to my diversified skill set, my proactive learning, and my sociable connections, I was able to start landscaping. My preparation, even if I didn't know that's what it was, helped me move forward where I would have been stuck. So, to make sure that you're not blindsided, stay open to the possibility that you might see a Black Swan, positive or negative. Distinguish between predictable and unpredictable fields, and make sure you're prepared for the unexpected by being proactive, sociable, and diversified. Remember, you don't have to be afraid of Black Swans as long as you're ready to respond to them. The book has lots of great insights into unpredictability that we didn't have time to cover in this video. If you're interested in going deeper, check out the short form guide to the Black Swan. Shortform makes the world's best guides to nonfiction books. They're like book summaries on steroids. You can get a 5-day free trial and a discounted annual subscription if you go to www.shortform.com/YouTube. Click the link in the description below. And support the author and publisher by buying The Black Swan. A link to the book can be found below as well. And finally, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next short form video. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.